The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, welcome to the training for today. This is Stephanie Berklin. Just wanted to give everyone a heads up that we will be starting right at noon, so please hold tight and we'll begin in just a few minutes. Hello, and thank you for joining us today for our training on planning for energy efficiency upgrades offered by Oregon Housing and Community Services Multifamily Energy Program. My name is Stephanie Berklin, and I will be the moderator for you today on our training. Our presenter today is Mecca Abraham, the Multifamily Energy Program's Technical Manager. Just a few housekeeping notes and instructions on how to use the GoToWebinar system. Today's webinar will be recorded and available on the program website within several days of the presentation. All attendees are currently in listen-only mode. If you'd like to ask questions, please enter your questions in the question box on the GoToWebinar panel. We will do our best to answer questions in the order that they are received. At the end of the training, we will open up the audio line for questions. In order to participate in the discussion at that time, please be sure to enter your audio pin located in the center panel of your screen and raise your hand in the meeting panel and we can unmute you. As a reminder, this webinar is part of a series of trainings geared towards supporting current multifamily energy program participants and multifamily professionals. We will cover topics relevant to both existing building and new construction projects. We do have two upcoming trainings after today's training. One is on Thursday, October 11th on optimizing multifamily building operations, and the second is on Thursday, October 25th, which is on health and safety in multifamily buildings. Future trainings will also be advertised in the monthly newsletter and on the program website. If you or anyone else is interested and are not signed up for a monthly newsletter, please click on the link in the slide currently shown and we can get you registered. Without further ado, I am going to pass it over to Mecca to talk about today's training. Mecca?
Thanks, Steph. Hello, and thank you all for joining this training on planning for energy efficiency upgrades. So this training is focused on retrofits in existing buildings and the recommended steps when specifically planning for energy efficiency upgrades. But in general, these principles could be applied when considering any improvement or upgrade in a multifamily building. So if you have a new construction project, the steps we'll cover are also relevant because, as we all know, eventually a brand new building turns into a building that is in need of an upgrade. So for those of you who have attended our previous trainings, this training builds upon the foundation of the intentional design and the energy auditing 101 courses. If you aren't able to attend those trainings, you can check out the recorded versions on our program website. And as far as the agenda goes today, we'll start off with an overview of the property life cycle, and then we'll dive into each step of the planning process. So let's jump in with the property life cycle and how energy efficiency fits into it. For those of you on this call today who are asset managers or property managers, this property life cycle is probably very familiar to you. So the first stage we're going to take a look at is the development stage. This is typically when a building is first constructed or could even apply to an existing building that just underwent a substantial renovation. And then the operation stage is when starts the day that a property gets occupied. This is when a building owner or property manager is managing the day-to-day responsibilities of the property and when residents are using the building. So with this usage comes daily wear and tear, and this accumulates over time. And then as this time progresses, whether this is after year 1 or year 20, the maintenance issues arise, and then necessary upgrades become more and more apparent. So when these upgrades become more substantial, either due to an end of useful life or perhaps you need to meet the new needs of the building, this often involves capital planning. So this moves into this bottom stage called capital management. And this is where significant upgrades are assessed to improve the building performance in order to extend its useful life. So the key steps in that are determining the capital financing to make these upgrades. And then also at this stage, there are significant equipment that may be replaced or alterations that may be made at the building. And then moving on to the next stage is the space management phase. So this could exist after the capital management phase, or it could occur concurrently with that stage. So when figuring out capital upgrades in an existing property, it may be necessary to look at if the building is fully capable of supporting its current use without any changes. Or perhaps maybe the building needs to be reprogrammed to meet new occupancy needs. Perhaps there are existing spaces that need to be redesigned or renovations need to be made to add space. So depending on how complex this can get, it may involve restarting this property life cycle all over again and moving back to the development stage to address these needs for a major renovation. So for the purposes of this training, we'll be focusing on the planning steps involved in the operations management and the capital management stages when it comes to making energy upgrades in your multifamily property. Okay, so before we get into the steps of planning for energy upgrades, let's talk about why it's worth investing in energy upgrades. So for multifamily properties, there are both owner and tenant benefits. And when you're investing in energy upgrades, there's often a common discussion on split incentives. And for properties where tenants pay the utility bills, there are split incentives for both the owner and the tenants. Tenants can actually realize the biggest benefit with lower energy bills, and this is especially helpful when providing affordable housing. So let's start looking at the owner benefits, and this includes enhanced property competitiveness by promoting a building that had reduced energy costs for residents. You can also promote it as being environmentally friendly and building that lowers its carbon footprint. Another benefit is improved net operating cash flow. And what you can do here is the energy and maintenance cost savings from these upgrades can then be repurposed to fund other projects. Owners can also take advantage of incentives offered by utilities and local governments. And with this, it's especially important to note that these incentives programs often have expiration dates. So it's best to take advantage of them when they are available and to consider doing as many upgrades as possible in order to maximize these incentives. So moving on to the tenant benefits, they include, we can start off with lower energy bills and with affordable housing that's intended to serve low-income populations. This is especially important in reducing a resident's energy burden and their share of income spent on utility bills. Tenants can also be less impacted from the risk of utility rate increases, and this would have a significant impact on low-income residents as well. And then another benefit is living in a more comfortable and healthier building. Tenants can also expect less maintenance issues with these improved energy upgrades, and this actually is a benefit for both owners and tenants. Okay, so when it comes to planning for upgrades, both for energy and beyond, we'll next be reviewing the following key steps in the planning process. So step 1 is understanding your property. Step 2 is building a strong team. And step 3, which is the bulk of what we'll be talking about today, is the analysis stage, and we'll get into capital needs assessments, energy audits, benchmarking, how to define goals, how to facilitate a design charrette, and then the financial analysis stage. After that, we'll move on to step 4 to determine the best strategy based on that analysis. And then we'll move on to step 5 to plan for how to implement those upgrades. And then step 6, planning for operations and maintenance. And then finally, how to plan for a post-completion evaluation. Okay, so we will start off with step 1 and understanding your property. Before doing any upgrades, one of the most important steps is understanding your property. So there are 2 main components associated with that. The first involves property oversight. And this might be the responsibility of the owner's asset manager, or perhaps the on-site property manager, or maybe a combination of both. But through property oversight, it allows you to maintain familiarity with your property, and then this then allows you to catch issues early and provide direct feedback to on-site staff. It also involves understanding the capital needs of the property compared to what's available in capital. And by understanding this capital needs and the available capital, it allows for a better planning of capital expenditures to address the issues and needs of the property. The second component is another important layer of property oversight, and it involves maintenance. And having an established maintenance plan will protect the property, and it also reduces costs. In addition, routine inspections of building systems will also lead to a better performing building and will also extend the life of the building. And probably most importantly, regular planned maintenance is cheaper than the unexpected and unplanned replacement, which can also be very stressful. So to be effective, this type of attention and care to property oversight and maintenance must be a value of the entire property team, from the owner down to the property manager and each of the maintenance staff. And this type of value and attention to detail can also be carried over to the residents to ensure that they're also comfortable with reporting maintenance issues and taking pride in caring for the property as well. So planning for upgrades doesn't have to involve a game of chance or luck. Once you have a thorough understanding of the property, there are some key factors you can consider to forecast improvements that are needed for typical building systems, such as replacing heating systems, windows, or insulation. So they include years in operation. So how old is the equipment, or when was it last upgraded? Next is the level and quality of the initial rehab or in construction. For example, there are known issues from the initial construction that have been problematic. That's good to know. Perhaps there are moisture issues that you're aware of. The next forecasting item is on construction defects. So are there any equipment that are deteriorating earlier than expected? Next, you can take a look at your projected operating expense versus the actual operating expense. So are these expenses, especially in an ARC scenario, energy costs, are they higher than expected? Or have there been unusual spikes or trends in energy usage? And finally, deferred maintenance. So are there upgrades that you have been put on hold, but know that are in need of replacement in the near future? So these factors can provide clues on what energy upgrades are needed. And really, the ultimate goal with this forecasting is to have planned preventative upgrades instead of reactive emergency upgrades that, like I mentioned before, are costly and stressful. Okay, so there are two types of upgrades that we wanted to discuss that often fall under energy upgrades, and actually it can actually apply to any building improvement, and these are maintenance and capital improvements. So maintenance upgrades, these are meant to retain the expected life of an existing equipment or systems, perhaps changing the filters on heating systems so they can operate at the peak performance, or it can include items that are used up within a shorter time frame during tenant turnover, such as lights. So some examples of maintenance upgrades include emergency or turnover repairs, routine or preventative maintenance, and tenant requested repairs. And generally, these maintenance upgrades are paid for through operating reserves. Moving on to the next type of upgrades, capital improvements. These could include upgrades that are meant to extend the useful life of a system and also increase the property value or add a new level or performance to the building or even a new amenity. So examples of capital improvements include replacements of major building systems such as replacing the roof or adding additional insulation, perhaps repairing or replacing windows, either to fix air sealing issues or replace ones that are poor performing or aged. Another common capital upgrade is replacing HVAC systems when the existing ones are near the end of its life. And then since capital improvements are typically more costly, it involves more consideration how to fund it. So they may come from a variety of sources, including operating reserves, replacement reserves, or may require refinancing loans or grants. So when planning for energy upgrades, it's important to identify what type of upgrade it is, and this will help with both planning for timing and how to fund the upgrades. So once you have a thorough understanding of your property, the next step involves building a strong team. So for when planning for energy upgrades, it's important to organize a strong team that can coordinate together to get work completed effectively and efficiently. And this is to maximize all the available resources. So there are typically three main groups of the team. There's the property team, the design team, and the financing team. And while this list may not include everyone involved, it's meant to highlight the key players when it comes to energy upgrades. So starting with the property team, this includes the asset manager, the property manager, and the maintenance staff. These are the folks that know the building really better than anyone. They know the ins and outs, the day-to-day issues, and can truly prioritize what's important and what's not. And this insider knowledge can then be transferred to the design team. So the design team includes the architect, the energy consultant, and contractor. And while they are all experts in their own field, they only know as much about the building as what they see and analyze and also have information on. So whatever information the property team can provide provides the best contact to provide direction for the design team and how to prioritize upgrades and information on what works and what doesn't work to meet the needs of that specific resident population in that building. So with the property team and the design team, effective communication is really critical to ensure and maximize resource planning. And also another note on that, within the design team, it's also important that there is effective communication between the architect, energy consultant, and the contractor as well. This is a point that we touched on during our previous training on intentional design. So for example, it's important that the architect is communicating with the energy consultant to confirm that the energy upgrades considered are correctly incorporated in the design of the building. And then likewise with the contractors, it's important that the upgrades are clearly communicated so they can ensure it's implemented correctly. So finally, the last step of this team is the financing team, and they provide a supporting but also important role in funding the project. So financing can come from the banks or state funding, such as tax credits, and when considering energy upgrades, like from incentive programs like the Multifamily Energy Program. And depending on the source of funding, it's important to be knowledgeable on the funding requirements of each of these mechanisms so that they are met when upgrades are completed. Okay, so now that we've built a strong team, we can move on to step 3, which is the analysis stage. And this often involves the bulk of the planning process. And in this section, we'll get into the types of analysis, and this includes capital needs assessments, energy audits, and benchmarking. And then we'll move on to how to define goals, and then how to host a design charrette, and considerations when doing financial analysis. So the first component of the analysis stage is completing assessments. So there are 2 forms of assessments that are typically involved when it comes to planning for energy upgrades. They include a capital needs assessment and an energy audit. Both assessments are similar, but the energy audit specifically focuses on the energy use of the building. So a capital needs assessment, or a CNA, is typically completed by an architect, and it's a report on the overall property. It estimates repairs and replacement needs over an extended period of time. And it may also analyze the way resources need to be accumulated to pay for these needs. CNAs look at the whole building, and depending on the funding source, may be a funding requirement, for example, with low-income housing tax credits. And with energy audits, this could be a component of a capital needs assessment, but it specifically looks at the existing building conditions as they relate to energy use. It's used to determine the current energy use and energy savings opportunities. And it can also identify and improve safety and comfort for residents. Since this involves a more specialized analysis of energy uses, it's typically completed by an energy consultant. And energy audits may also be a requirement for funding, for example, in our program with the whole building pathway. So assessments in both capital needs assessments and energy audits can be split into several categories based on the depth of the audit. So starting with level 1, this audit involves the least cost-intensive recommendations to building owners. These recommendations typically involve improving the use of the existing systems through set points or installation adjustments, and they're often low-cost or no-cost upgrades. Level 2 audits is the minimum level required for this program, and it involves more intensive recommendations and may include replacement of existing systems. And these audits may also involve the analysis of energy currently used by the building. Level 3 audits are the most exhaustive level and result in the deepest recommendations. So this level of audit will likely involve financial analysis and potential savings versus cost of the installation of the recommendations. And it may also include data monitoring of existing systems and engineering analysis to help drive those recommendations. So level 1 audits start at looking at more low-cost upgrades, while level 3 audits dive deeper into more capital upgrades. And with this deeper analysis comes an increase in the cost of that assessment. So during the assessment analysis, it's important to understand the life cycles of building systems. Here we've listed out the typical expected useful life of building systems that have energy impacts. And at the assessment phase, this can be used as a reference point to determine the current age for any given system. So based on that age, upgrades can be prioritized based on oldest to newest systems. So let's say, for example, you have an 18-year-old water heater. So water heaters fall under the 15 to 20 life cycle bucket. So at an age of 18 years, it's nearing its expected and useful life. Signs of it not performing well would be a good indicator that it's in need of replacement. Or maybe you just you're really lucky and you have an amazingly performing water heater. So that may show that there's still life remaining in it, but to avoid a costly and unpredictable failure, it's best to plan for such an upgrade ahead of time. So this typically is the type of investigation that the energy consultant would complete, analyzing each specific building system to determine its age in the energy audit. This might come from previous construction drawings or maintenance records. And this is just wanted to reiterate that when detailed maintenance records are kept, the property team can play a huge role in helping the energy consultant to determine these ages. So for those of you that are part of the property team, we would encourage you to include this as part of your property oversight plan. And this can enable you to be more knowledgeable of your building and transfer that knowledge to your design team. Okay, so when considering energy upgrades, it's important to understand the energy use of your building. So as part of the energy audit, the energy consultant will typically complete an analysis called energy benchmarking of the building's energy bills. And this is to identify trends, spikes, anomalies in the energy use. So energy benchmarking is something that the property team can complete on their own. And we're sharing this resource on the screen here. It's from Energy Star, and they have an online tool called Portfolio Manager that allows you to enter your monthly energy usage and track trends over time. This can be incorporated without much effort in your monthly review of your energy bills from your electric and gas utility. And as you're reviewing your energy bills, you can easily enter the energy costs and the usage in Portfolio Manager and then use that to track trends. So if by incorporating this as a regular process, it makes it less daunting than doing it yearly, and as a property owner, makes you more aware of your building's energy costs. So if an unusual trend is discovered, you can investigate it right away. If you have any questions on how to set up an account in Portfolio Manager, please reach out and we'd be happy to help out. And energy benchmarking is also something that tenants can also track. So both Portland General Electric and Pacific Power have energy trackers when you view your home energy bill. So these graphical displays provide an easy reference point to track spikes in energy use. What's shown here in this slide is an example from PGE's energy tracker. And with this, property managers can encourage tenants to use these tools through tenant education, and it's actually mutually beneficial to both the property manager and the tenant, because a tenant who is educated on their energy usage will be able to provide direct feedback to the property team, when something is out of the ordinary. And this can also help managers in their planning efforts. Okay, so after assessments, actually I'll pause if Steph, we have any questions.
Yeah, sure. So I just want to remind folks on the phone, if you have any questions, please put them into the question box in the GoToWebinar pane, and we'll be happy to answer them. Mecca, we do have a question from a little bit earlier on about, you had mentioned incentive programs. And the question is how do we learn about incentive programs, and what sources can help us evaluate all incentives available for our properties? Can we call the multifamily energy program staff to help understand those?
All right, great question. Yes, so we are definitely available to help to assess energy incentives and also other incentives if there are resources available. So if you have any other whatever measures you're considering, please reach out to us and we can let you know what incentives the multifamily energy program can provide, and also complementary programs like Energy Trust of Oregon. We'd be happy to help provide support on that.
Great, thank you. And that's all we have for right now.
Thanks. Okay, so once assessments and energy benchmarking is completed, it's important for the property team and the design team to come together to define goals. So there are 4 main goals to consider when planning for energy upgrades. The first is performance. So how much energy does your building consume? Are you trying to get energy costs below a certain level, or are you trying to reach a certain percentage of energy savings? Those are some of the questions that you might have to reach those goals. Next, on the operations side, you might ask yourself, what are the goals when it comes to the cost and maintenance required for energy measures? So depending on how much on-site maintenance staff there is, or if this work is contracted out, this can vary for each building. And then next, for green and sustainability goals, you may want to consider, are you trying to achieve a certain certification level, say Passive House or Earth Advantage? And also you might want to consider, how should environmental or material or comfort factors of certain materials or equipment factor into that decision making. And finally, resiliency. It's a relatively newer topic that's gaining more importance in response to protecting against extreme weather and natural disasters. And for the Pacific Northwest, this might include preparing for earthquakes, or a prevalent or recent trend with the extreme summer heat waves. So now you might have to start considering perhaps cooling in buildings may soon now become a necessity rather than an amenity. So it's important for the entire project team to discuss and define these goals early on, and then this sets the stage for how to plan for these upgrades. So the goals that we previously just discussed, they're often a component of a design charrette that could be hosted by the architect or by an energy consultant when it's more energy focused. So over the next few slides, we've put together a framework for a design charrette checklist, and that can be used as a reference for projects you're working on. And like we mentioned previously, effective communication with the entire project team will allow the project to maximize resources, and the design charrette is the perfect venue to bring people together to discuss that. We also want to note that there can oftentimes be multiple incentive programs that projects can take advantage of that can facilitate or even offset the cost of these design charrettes. So we would encourage you to research these opportunities, and we're happy to provide support on that as well. So diving into the specifics of the design charrette discussion topic, it often starts with the project overview. So this is often provided by the project team, who can provide a project history, background on the resident demographics, funding sources that they anticipate, the schedule, and then an overview on existing finances. Next, the goals that we mentioned on the previous slide for the project goals should be discussed to set the stage of planning. And with the goals defined, you can move on to getting into the specifics of the property, starting with the site design and layout. And while this is not typically specifically tied with energy upgrades, understanding the site can have other implications on overall sustainability goals that the architect can plan around, such as stormwater management. When it comes to energy upgrades, the next discussion topics are some of the most crucial. So first comes reviewing existing conditions. When an energy audit is already completed, this can be used as the guide to look at the specific building systems. For example, the envelope, what are the slab and foundation conditions, what does the wall insulation look like, what's the condition of the roof and the windows. or say, for example, with HVAC, what are the heating and cooling systems? How are they performing? Do they meet the needs of the occupants? And then all the way covering from lighting, appliances, domestic hot water, and also considering renewables when it comes to solar, energy storage, or backup power. So when reviewing these existing conditions, it's important to discuss the issues that were identified in the energy audit, figure out how much remaining life is in these systems, and then explore potential upgrade options. So with a complete understanding of the existing conditions, you can then identify and prioritize upgrades. So this can be determined based on property goals, maintenance goals, and knowing the impact of certain upgrades on the tenant population type. So for example, if you're considering going from electric baseboards to ductless heat pumps, the property team will want to consider the steps that are needed for cleaning the filters and then the maintenance costs associated with that. So if that's going to be done by the property team, or alternatively, how you can provide tenant education so tenants are mindful of cleaning their filters on their own. So once the upgrades have been identified and prioritized, the next discussion topics involve materials and product specifications. So this ties into the goals of the project. Perhaps you want to spec low VOCs or Energy Star label appliances. You may also want to develop a construction waste management plan. And then next is operations and maintenance. So while it may seem early to discuss operation and maintenance at the design charrette stage, it's a critical step in the planning stage because energy upgrades are only as effective when they are operated and maintained properly. So O&M considerations should be discussed. They include planning for energy benchmarking commitments by the property team to track energy usage like we previously discussed, testing and verification and system commissioning of major HVAC systems to ensure that they're operating as designed at the end of construction and at major building milestones. And then developing O&M resources so the maintenance staff knows how these systems were installed and how they operate. And then finally, providing tenant education so tenants are aware of the energy features of the building and how to use them properly so that they are operating as intended. So these are the main topics of a design charrette that we recommend, and we encourage you to use this as a reference for projects that you're working on. If you have any specific questions on organizing a design charrette, we'd be happy to help. So the last important step of the analysis stage after upgrades have been identified is determining how you're going to fund these upgrades. So this is a diagram of a typical improvements that are made in multifamily properties. The upgrades that involve energy efficiency opportunities are starred. And more involved and costly upgrades are often ones that come from the capital budget, whereas low-cost measures often occur at tenant turnover and come out of the operating budget. But in reality, there is really no one-size-fits-all model for determining how to fund a project. It really comes down to the specifics of each project and how they're funded and the different funding mechanisms that are available. So now that we've completed the analysis stage, we can move on to step 4 to determine the best strategy. So there are 3 main options when approaching upgrades. The first is a phased rehab, and this is for properties where improvements are not significantly more than the available reserves, and these can be completed over time in stages using available capital. The next option is a full rehab, and these are for properties with significant upgrades that require significant capital needs. And then the final option is redevelopment, and this is for properties with upgrades that are more than the value of the of the property's remaining life, and it may be worth considering whether to sell the property or reinvest in a new development. So both the phase and full rehabs can be funded through refinancing, tax credits, or incentives, such as what's offered through the Multifamily Energy Program. So once you've determined your strategy, you can then move on to step 5 to implement upgrades. This involves close oversight by the architect, the energy consultant, and the contractors to ensure that the upgrades are implemented correctly. So the implementation stage can be very complex with the entire construction process. So we only wanted to focus on one area we wanted to highlight is how to plan and minimize construction defects. We know we're only touching on this at a high level to discuss the essentials. So first, when it comes to specifications, it's important to not vary from specified products because it was specified for a reason. Less expensive products usually mean lower quality, so it's important to be selective when going through the inevitable value engineering process. And it's also important to incorporate the entire team when developing specifications to ensure that they're spec'd as intended by the design team. And finally, you can develop an owner's standard for specifications. So this can streamline future upgrades that are in similar scope for the owner for across their other properties. And when it comes to installation, it's important to conduct pre-installation meetings for major systems such as envelope or HVAC systems, and to be sure that all the key trades that are involved in that process understand it. And this is especially important for advanced envelope upgrades in retrofit scenarios. And you can also create mock-ups and testing procedures that can provide more clarity on that process. And finally, during the installation process, it's important to inspect building components for potential construction defects at regular intervals. And that's not just at the end, but throughout at regular intervals during construction. So after upgrades have been implemented, the next step is operations and maintenance. And at a high level, we wanted to share with you this maintenance checklist that you can use as a reference. As a reminder, we'll be having a full O&M training on October 11th, so I'd encourage you to sign up for that training to get more details. And this maintenance checklist should involve both the property team and the design team in creating it. So the first is creating an O&M manual, and this would be used by the maintenance staff so they understand the newly installed equipment and systems. And maintenance training should be hosted by the architect, contractor, and equipment vendors at the completion of the project, and also walking through this equipment with the maintenance staff. Next, when it comes to warranties, the property team should remember to place warranty periods on a calendar so you can be alerted as they're approaching, and then remember to review those conditions and systems when they're up for warranty. And if applicable, you can establish maintenance contracts with outside vendors such as HVAC technicians that are familiar with the new equipment installed in your building. And another important component is providing tenant education by preparing information manuals and reviewing it to tenants during the leasing periods. And at the one-year inspection, this is a good opportunity to regroup with the project team and complete a walkthrough inspection to ensure that all systems are operating as intended. So once the O&M steps are established, the final step is completing a post-completion evaluation. So the post-completion evaluation involves a feedback loop that allows for continuous improvement. And the activities involved in this are the property team monitoring energy performance, and this could be either through benchmarking or commissioning of key systems. And then next, reviewing the lessons learned with the project team, like we mentioned before, perhaps at 1 year after completion. And then finally, completing regular resident satisfaction surveys. And this is a great opportunity to get direct feedback from residents on the completed upgrades. After completing these upgrades, the project team can then take action and apply these lessons learned to future projects. So that concludes all the steps for the planning process and my presentation. So I will pause now for if there are any questions.
Thank you, Mecca. So just a reminder, please feel free to enter your questions into the question box or raise your hand and make sure that your audio pin has been entered, and we're happy to unmute you. Mecca, we did have one follow-up question come in through about incentives regarding OHCS incentives and Energy Trust incentives and understanding which measures qualify for what program. What would be the advice to understanding which measures are covered by which program?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so if you have a specific project, I would definitely recommend for reaching out to our project team. As a reminder, the Multifamily Energy Program serves for electric heated buildings and electric savings measures. It's funded by Portland General Electric and Pacific Power. That's where the incentives are funded through, which is also the same funding source as Energy Trust of Oregon. So it's important to make sure there is no overlap. So we're happy to help provide more guidance and direction on which program you can participate in.
Great. And a follow-up question to that is, when should we contact both programs to understand about incentives?
Yeah, I would recommend contacting both programs as early as possible. That way we can both maintain communication, and we'd be happy to coordinate that coordination with the Energy Trust of Oregon team as well.
Great, thank you. At this time, we don't have any further questions, but I would like to remind people that if you think of questions after today's training, feel free to reach out to the program team we will have the contact information on the next slide. And we're here to answer your questions and support your projects in any way possible. Once again, this session has been recorded and will be posted onto the program website listed here on the screen within several days of this training. Thank you everybody for attending, and have a wonderful rest of your day.